Did you know that almost 700 people came within seconds of dying over Tokyo on a calm winter afternoon? 2 Japan Airlines jets, both under radar control, were cleared onto a collision course by mistake. In one cockpit, the captain heard a calm voice from air traffic control. In the other, a machine demanded immediate action. 1 human, 1 system, and a decision that saved hundreds of lives. It happened on the 31st of January, 2001. 2 giant passenger planes crossed paths above central Japan, one climbing, one descending, closing on each other at nearly 1,000 kilometers an hour. The distance between them would shrink to just 40 meters. This is the story of how training, confusion, and a split-second choice prevented one of aviation's deadliest mid-air collisions. It's about what happens when a human voice contradicts the logic of a computer, and how one captain's doubts saved hundreds of families from tragedy. Title card appears. If the captain had obeyed, everyone would be dead. The winter sky over Tokyo Bay was perfectly clear. No storms, no turbulence, just a... Inside Haneda Airport, Japan Airlines Flight 907, a Boeing 747-400D carrying 427 people prepared for its routine flight to Okinawa. Engines roared, flaps lowered, checklists complete. At 3:36 p.m., the heavy jet rolled down the runway and lifted into the blue. At almost the same moment, another Japan Airlines flight was inbound from Busan, South Korea. Flight 958, a McDonnell Douglas DC-10, carried 250 passengers and crew on its final approach to Narita. Both aircraft were under the control of the Tokyo Area Control Center, separated by altitude and direction, their paths perfectly safe in theory. In Tokyo Control that afternoon, a trainee controller sat at his console, learning to manage live traffic. Beside him, his supervisor watched quietly. It was supposed to be a slow, predictable day. Dozens of green symbols glowed on the radar screen, each one a jet moving through the busy airspace around Japan. For almost an hour, nothing stood out. Aircraft climbed, descended, crossed paths safely. The trainee's job was to keep them apart, using simple rules of altitude and timing. When 2 targets approach each other, give one a climb order, the other a descent order. Simple. But then, for just a moment, his supervisor stepped away. The trainee looked up and saw 2 symbols, JAL 907 and JAL 958, crossing near Shizuoka Prefecture. Their altitudes looked close. He grabbed his microphone to correct it. Japan Air 907, descend to flight level 350, he said in English, calm and precise. It sounded routine, but it was the wrong plane to descend. Flight 907 was climbing, not level, and Flight 958 was cruising below at flight level 370. The instruction put them on a collision course. In the cockpit of the 747, Captain Taisuke Sato heard the order and acknowledged it. He gently pushed the control column forward and began to descend. Seconds later, a mechanical voice interrupted the routine. Traffic. Traffic. The aircraft's collision avoidance computer had detected danger. On the DC-10 below, the same alert sounded, descend, descend. But on the 747's display, a different message flashed. Climb, climb. 2 aircraft, 2 opposite orders, 1 decision to make. Captain Sato hesitated for a moment. Which voice should he trust, the controller on the ground, or the machine in his cockpit? In the cockpit of Japan Airlines Flight 907, Captain Taisuke Sato stared at the traffic display. A red diamond blinked directly ahead. His instincts told him something was wrong. The controller's voice had said descend, but the collision warning system now said climb. On his right, the first officer repeated, "Climb, command displayed." The machine's voice cut in again. "Climb, climb." For a second, neither man moved. Years of training told them to obey air traffic control. Controllers see the bigger picture. They coordinate everyone in the sky. But the Traffic Collision Avoidance System, TCAS, was built for one thing only: to prevent mid-air collisions. When two aircraft come too close, each system automatically calculates an escape maneuver, one climbing, one descending. If both follow their instructions, disaster is avoided. If even one crew does not, the result can be catastrophic. In the DC-10 below, Captain Akira Takahashi and his crew followed their TCAs in order to descend. Their altimeter wound down as they dropped through 37,000 feet. Up above, Captain Sato, still trusting the controller, continued his descent from 39,000 toward 35. Two massive jets, moving head-on at nearly 500 knots each, closing speed almost 1,000 kilometers per hour. The Tokyo controller, realizing too late that something was wrong, tried to correct his call. Radio tone: Japan Air 907, climb immediately. But the frequency was crowded, and the transmission overlapped with another pilot. The message went unheard. Inside both cabins, passengers began to sense something was off. On Flight 907, the seatbelt sign was still off. Stood in the aisles, stretching, chatting. Then came the warning chime. The sudden change in engine pitch. The aircraft began to pitch down. In the DC-10, flight attendants were preparing for descent when the plane suddenly dropped. One crew member grabbed a seat to keep balance. A passenger shouted, "What's happening?" The captain called out, "Descending! TCAS warning!" Above them, the 747's altimeter spun downward. The two aircraft were now less than 5 miles apart, closing fast. Captain Sato finally saw the DC-10's silhouette appear through the haze, a faint glint of metal against the sky. He realized instantly the descent was wrong. He pulled hard on the yoke, pushed the throttles forward, and the 747 began to climb. At that moment, there were only seconds left. The nose of the 747 lifted sharply. Cabin pressure shifted. Passengers felt their stomachs drop as gravity seemed to disappear. The aircraft's massive wings strained against the air, engines roaring as Captain Sato fought to climb. At the same instant, below and ahead, Captain Takahashi's DC-10 was plunging through its own emergency descent. Two great machines, one diving, one climbing, hurtling toward the same invisible point in the sky. For 5 seconds, their radar echoes merged on the controller's screen, a single dot where there should have been two. Inside Tokyo Control, the trainee's face went pale. He froze, staring at the display. His supervisor, rushing back to the console, shouted, "What have you done?" Outside, over the Pacific coast, the two aircraft crossed paths. The DC-10 flashed beneath the 747's belly, missing by only about 40 meters less than the length of the smaller plane itself. In the cabins, chaos erupted. On Flight 907, passengers were thrown upward. Some struck the ceiling. Trays, drinks, newspapers, even a child's toy floated for a heartbeat before crashing down. 6 people were injured, including 2 cabin crew. One flight attendant was badly hurt when she hit her head against an overhead bin. Inside the cockpit, Captain Sato fought to stabilize the aircraft. He had seconds to decide whether to turn back or continue. Adrenaline still coursed through him, but his training took over. He leveled the 747, checked instruments, called for an immediate report of injuries. Then, calmly, he told Tokyo Control they were returning to Haneda. The DC-10, unaware of the exact distance they'd just missed, continued to Narita as planned. Only later would the crews realize how close they had come to one of the worst collisions in aviation history. Back in the control center, silence filled the room. The supervisor took over the frequency, issuing new separation orders to other flights, while the trainee sat motionless, hands trembling. A simple phrase, "Descend to 350, had nearly killed hundreds of people. For several minutes, the two radar returns drifted apart again, their altitudes diverging, the danger over. But on the tapes, the voices of both crews and controllers would reveal a chilling confusion: two systems, both correct in their own logic, but deadly when combined. When TCAS and ATC disagree, the question every pilot now asks is simple: which one do you trust? When Japan Airlines Flight 907 finally rolled to a stop at Haneda, chaos gave way to silence. Moments later, flashing lights surrounded the aircraft. Ambulances, emergency vans, and medics racing toward the open doors. Inside the cabin, the scene was surreal. Ceiling panels cracked. Luggage hung from overhead bins. Food trays and drinks scattered across the floor. The air smelled of spilled coffee and jet fuel, mixed with shock and fear. An unbelievable 100 people were injured. The impact had been so violent that Tokyo's emergency services had to call in extra ambulances to care for the wounded. 9 of them were seriously hurt, 7 passengers and 2 members of the cabin crew, some with deep head injuries, others with broken bones and spinal trauma. One flight attendant lay unconscious where she'd struck the ceiling, blood pooling beneath her hair as colleagues tried to revive her. Another, limping and dazed, helped passengers who could still move toward the exits. Children cried. Oxygen masks swung above their heads. People clutched each other in disbelief, realizing how close they had come to dying in the sky. Captain Sato sat motionless in the cockpit, staring at the dim instruments. He had brought the aircraft home, but he couldn't shake the images behind him, the screams, the sudden climb, the violent lurch that threw people into the air. He reached for his logbook and wrote a single line: "Returned to Haneda following TCAS advisory conflict." Nothing more. Down below, at Narita, the DC-10 that had passed beneath them landed without a scratch. Its passengers walked off, unaware of what had just unfolded, that their lives had come within 40 meters of ending. No one on Flight 958 was injured. No one even knew. By the time both aircraft were parked, the investigation had already begun. Radar recordings, cockpit voice tapes, and ATC logs were seized within hours. It didn't take long to uncover the chain of errors. A trainee, controller, alone at his console for a moment, had issued a descent order to the wrong aircraft. His supervisor, who should have caught it, had stepped away. But beneath the human error lay a deeper question, one that would reshape aviation training around the world. Why had the captain followed the controller instead of the collision avoidance system? For decades, the hierarchy was simple. Pilots obeyed air traffic control. Now, for the first time, that trust had failed. The next morning, Japanese headlines read, "2 Japan Airlines jets nearly collide, 677 lives saved by seconds." Public outrage erupted. How could this happen in an era of computers, radar, and global navigation? Within Japan Airlines, every pilot, every instructor, replayed the event and asked the same question. What would I have done? Almost all gave the same answer. They would have obeyed ATC just as Captain Sato did. But after that day, the rule would change forever. When TCAS speaks, you follow the machine. Within days, the investigation took on the scale of a national crisis. The Aircraft and Railway Accidents Investigation Commission, or ARAIC, released a preliminary summary that stunned the public. It confirmed that the trainee controller had mistaken one call sign for another, instructing Flight 907 to descend instead of the DC-10 below it. That single error, made in less than 10 seconds, set two wide-body jets on a collision course over one of the world's busiest skies. But what caught global attention wasn't just the mistake, it was what happened after it. Captain Sato's 747 had received a clear, automated order to climb. He ignored it, choosing instead to follow the voice of a human controller. The result was chaos in the cabin, nearly 100 injuries, and a narrow escape from one of aviation's worst catastrophes. The ARAIC's final report was blunt. It described a breakdown in cockpit authority, a hesitation to trust technology over tradition. For decades, pilots had been trained to respect air traffic control as the ultimate authority. Now, that hierarchy had to be rewritten. In the months that followed, Japan Airlines overhauled its internal procedures. Simulators were updated to include TCAS conflict training. Every pilot, from new hire to captain, drilled the same mantra. When TCAS issues a resolution advisory, you follow it immediately and without question. The change didn't stop there. ICAO, the International Civil Aviation Organization, issued a global directive reinforcing the same rule. Air traffic controllers around the world were instructed never to override a TCAS command once issued. From that moment on, machines would coordinate with each other automatically, without interference from humans. For Captain Sato, the months after the incident were difficult. He faced internal review boards, media pressure, and personal guilt. Yet many pilots defended him, saying they might have reacted exactly the same. He'd done what he was trained to do, to trust the voice on the radio. In a sense, he became a reluctant symbol of an industry learning to adapt to its own technology. When the final ARAIC report was published, one line stood out. It read, "Had both crews followed TCAS instructions, the near collision would not have occurred." That single sentence became law and practice, rewritten into flight manuals, procedures, and every airline's training syllabus. The incident had no fatalities, but it reshaped global air safety. From then on, the sound of a synthetic voice saying "climb, climb," or "descend, descend," was no longer advisory. It was an order from the machine that never sleeps. In the years that followed, the near collision over Tokyo became more than a case study. It became a turning point, a moment when aviation finally accepted that human judgment and machine logic had to coexist, not compete. Across flight schools and simulator halls, the phrase, "trust the machine," echoed like a mantra. Pilots learned that technology isn't an intrusion, it's a second mind that never blinks. But for those who lived through that day, the lesson came at a personal cost. Captain Sato left Japan Airlines soon after the investigation closed. He spoke rarely about what happened, and when he did, his words were quiet, almost philosophical. He said, "The hardest thing about flying is not the weather, not the systems, it's trust. Trusting yourself, your crew, and knowing when to trust the machine." For the crew of Flight 907, recovery took months. Some suffered lasting injuries, both physical and psychological. Cabin crew members underwent therapy for trauma. One flight attendant, the woman who'd been knocked unconscious, returned to flying a year later. She told interviewers she refused to let fear take away the thing she loved most, the sky. For passengers, life simply went on. Most returned to work, to families, to the rhythm of everyday life. But a few carried the memory like a scar. They remembered the sudden silence before the climb, the sight of objects hanging weightless, the disbelief that they were still alive when the plane leveled off again. In Japan's aviation community, the incident changed everything. New systems linked radar and TCAS to prevent conflicting instructions. Controllers received updated procedures, mandatory rest breaks, and stricter supervision rules. Globally, every airline revised its manuals to state the rule explicitly. When TCAS speaks, follow it. Always. It wasn't the first time human error nearly cost lives, but it was one of the last major incidents before full TCAS integration became universal. The industry learned, it adapted, and, quietly, it honored those moments when a single decision made the difference between tragedy and survival. 2 decades later, pilots still study the radar traces of that Day 2 aircraft crossing paths at nearly 1,000 kilometers an hour, separated by less than the height of a single building. They look at that frozen frame and understand. It wasn't luck. It was instinct, training, and a system that finally proved its worth. Every time a captain hears that calm synthetic voice say, "Climb" or "descend," they know where that certainty came from one clear afternoon over Tokyo, when almost 700 lives depended on a choice between 2 voices. Today, every pilot who lifts off from Tokyo, London, or Los Angeles carries an invisible legacy of that near disaster. The system that almost failed now protects billions of passengers each year. And the men and women who lived through it, the passengers, the crew, even the controller whose mistake began, it all became silent teachers for a generation of aviators. Aviation is built on lessons written in fear, in courage, and sometimes in blood. But this one ended differently. No wreckage, no funerals, just the sound of 2 jets passing in the sky, a few 100 feet apart, and the realization that humanity had been given one more chance to get it right. When you next hear that calm synthetic voice say, "Traffic, traffic," remember where it came from. Tokyo, 2001. 2 Japan Airlines aircraft, 1 heartbeat away from history.